subject of the environment is a big issue for us all right now, although I guess it always has been. But in the coming months and weeks, the debate about climate will become white hot, with such a lot at stake, including the future of global energy policy and a possible retreat from some of the world's net zero carbon targets. We will be tracking this debate. It's very important. Now, some of you are going to hate this, but I thought it was time to share with you that I have become increasingly relaxed about the threat of climate change. Now, don't get me wrong, just to be clear, do I think the climate is changing? Yes, absolutely I do. Do I think the planet is getting warmer? Yes, I do. But do I think it's a threat to the future of humanity? Absolutely not. So let's get into the reasons why I think that in just a moment. Now, don't get me wrong, I love nature. I can't tolerate pollution, and I believe we all have a responsibility to take good care of this planet, including all its oceans. However, climate change and the hysteria that comes with it has become quite a different thing altogether. Here's one example. Back in 2019, the young firebrand of the Democrat Party, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, declared in the House of Representatives that unless we did something about climate change, the world would end in 12 years. Well, we're now halfway through that 12 years, and as far as I can tell, we're still here and seem to be doing pretty much okay. And that, of course, was just one of dozens of failed or failing predictions by climate extremists. Unless I've missed it somehow, there's never an explanation when they're wrong, let alone an apology. Meanwhile, there's the bizarre spectacle of people throwing soup over priceless artworks or supergluing themselves to the freeway, believing that's going to somehow change the weather patterns around the world. Now to the reasons why I am now relaxed about climate change, and there are 12 of them. I've been working pretty hard on that list of 12, researching to get a good understanding of what are the variables in climate and what are the ones that are changing and what are the ones that matter. And common to every one on the list is that even if some of the more pessimistic forecasts do come true, we will have time to mitigate and adapt, just like we as a species have always done over hundreds of thousands of years. In the interest of time, I won't go through the full description for each item on the list. I'll put a link to my support materials in the description below. Most of this information is supported by peer-reviewed publications, validated data, some of it through simple observation, and some of it just my common sense opinion. Here's the 12-point list. Reasons why I am relaxed about climate change. First, global temperatures have risen. There has been some melting of the Arctic sea ice, and sea levels are a little higher. But as I'll explain, none of that at a level that should be a cause for concern for anybody. Meanwhile, there's a lot of very good news on my list. We often don't hear about the good news, do we? The number of people killed by natural disasters has fallen dramatically, and the trend continues through 2025. The Antarctic has shown no signs of warming, and the ice is growing there. The coral reefs are in good shape. The polar bear population has risen. And the global food supply is up, while drought is no longer considered an emerging threat, while the Earth is somewhere between 15 and 20% greener. I hope you're starting to feel a little better. Now let's zoom in on a couple of these items. And first of all, let's take a look at temperature. This is often the one that is most confusing and sometimes most misleading. Yes, temperatures are rising, but by tiny amounts. 0.06 degrees Celsius per decade since 1850. 2024 was 1.2 degrees above the 20th century average. Now, I'm certainly no meteorologist, but I don't think I would even notice 1.2 degrees. In the US, NASA data from the most accurate measurement network there shows the hottest temperatures were recorded in the first half of the 20th century. And there's been no significant increase in daily temperatures for at least 20 years. Now, this chart, by the way, is a perfect example of how you can manipulate the story by careful choice of the starting point. When you hear the words hottest on record, look at the fine print to figure out which record. And please note where the most recent data point sits. Meanwhile, if you're worried about human survival in this debate, we should definitely favour heat ahead of cold. A study in The Lancet shows cold weather kills 10 times the number of people that heat kills. Now let's move on to sea levels. And yes, sea levels have been rising for about 150 years. The current estimate is an annual rise of 3 millimetres, or about 1/8 of an inch, a rate that suggests society can easily mitigate and adapt. A 3 millimetre a year rise over the next 100 years would bring sea levels up about that much. Mankind has already proven the ability to mitigate against sea level rise. It's estimated that 100 million people already live either at or below sea level. Storm barriers and seawalls have proven effective for centuries. Just look at the genius engineers in the Netherlands. Now to sea ice. The fear about sea levels is obviously directly linked to the fate of the polar ice caps, both the Arctic and the Antarctic. Now, the Arctic has shown some declines, although both the maximum and minimum levels have stabilised in the past 17 years. There was quite a dramatic decline in 2007, which I think is probably what started the panic over the fate of the Arctic ice. But as you can see, the ice has been relatively stable since then. Meanwhile, at the South Pole, the Antarctic is showing signs of growing its ice volumes, and a 2020 study published in the journal Nature found Antarctica had not experienced measurable warming for the past 70 years. Now let's move to a warmer place, to the coral reefs. You can imagine this is a subject very dear to my heart as a diver and as an Australian. Every few years, the natural bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef is used as an example of the effects of global warming. But everyone seems to miss the point that the coral polyps, tiny coral polyps that build the reef, are tropical animals that thrive in warm water. Thankfully, the Great Barrier Reef has shown record levels of coral in the past 3 years. Long may it be so. This data was actually confirmed in 2022, but there was a concerted effort to bury the report. The next 2 years came back with the same numbers, so it's now accepted as true. This is not the first time the Great Barrier Reef has been the subject of scientific or media distortion. Back in 2009, a study reported that part of the reef had suffered long-term heat damage and acidification, the worst in over 400 years, they said. The report created headlines, of course. 4 years later, a new study completely disproved the first one. But this is how the game is played, you see. The alarm produced by the first paper lived on in the headlines for years, appearing 50 times more often than the later correction. And it's taken all this time, 16 years, to get the story straight. This is the Australian government's most recent report, and the Great Barrier Reef is just fine. Whatever happens with climate change, it will happen slowly. Temperatures rising at much less than 1/10 of a degree per decade, and sea levels rising at 3 millimetres a year is not exactly fast track. More people die from the cold than the heat, and there is either little or no evidence that severe weather events are on the rise. Mankind is very good at dodging a crisis, and in this case, we have plenty of notice. There is no need to panic. A few days ago, I was lucky enough to speak with a real expert in this field, Linnea Lueken, research fellow at the Heartland Institute in America. Now, the Heartland Institute is a conservative, not-for-profit think tank, which I believe has offered a realistic and honest assessment in this climate debate. And Linnea had a lot of interesting input. Linnea, thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here at Gary's in the Shed.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Gary. It's an honor.
Oh, thank you. So this has been such an interesting journey for me. I'm certainly not a scientist or an expert on anything in particular, but I'm fascinated by the various debates going on around climate change. And I've shared with my audience a list of 12 things that I've looked into at some depth to try to educate myself about whether or not climate change is really an existential threat to mankind, which I do not believe. So where do you think I am in this thing? How do you feel about climate change?
Well, I certainly don't think that it's an existential threat, not on any timescale that matters anyway. The climate of the planet has always changed. Different regions of the planet have different climates. They have always changed. Stasis is not natural for Earth. So anybody who expects it is expecting something that would be not only unnatural, but something that you would have to try to control aggressively. It's kind of like trying to keep track of or trying to keep control over like a national forest or something. Because the planet is always changing, you have to aggressively maintain things the way that they are in order to keep them there. Otherwise, they're going to change on their own. So it's frustrating to see people act as though it would be unusual for anything to ever change.
Yes, it's the only constant, really. Is change.
Yes.
So at the heart of all of this, of course, is this big document produced by the IPCC. So for people who don't know, IPCC stands for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they publish these reports. It seems to me a very strange way they go about it. Can you give us a simple explanation of how that's produced?
Absolutely. So the IPCC puts together kind of two main categories of report. So first, they will do a couple of scientific working group reports where they have scientists from different areas of expertise, all approved, of course, by the United Nations. It's difficult for people to kind of get their data into the IPCC if it contradicts the, kind of catastrophic narrative. And yet, these working group reports tend to be pretty modest about the claims that they make. The data, they rely more on hard data, although they do rely on a lot of computer modeling, like projections, which are not data, which are not proof of anything, which I want to get across to people. Just because something's been modeled in the computer doesn't mean that it's real. Yeah. So, and that's something that the IPCC leans pretty heavily on, unfortunately. And that's how you get all of the stories saying, we anticipate temperatures to increase this much by this date. But they also do record measured data. and they discuss whether or not their expectations have appeared in the measured data yet. And across the board, especially when it comes to extreme weather conditions like hurricanes or tornadoes, the answer is no for the most part.
Yeah, reality hasn't matched the forecast at all so far.
Yeah, not at all. And at least not to the extent that they claim that it will. And then you have after the scientific working group reports are put together, you have what's called the summary for policymakers, which is the report that's going to be largely leaned on by the media and politicians. And the working group reports are a completely different story than this summary for policymakers most of the time. There is very little nuance in the policymakers summary. It is always far more catastrophic than even what the working group reports claim. And so it kind of just gets more dramatic the less detailed these reports become. And that's the only one that a politician will ever see.
And then the media gets hold of it and puts another layer of drama on. Yes. So
absolutely.
It's very interesting because a lot of the data that I was using when I was writing about my 12 climate point variables comes from the scientific reports of the IPCC. And this information is not easy to get, right? Because the last one, IPCC 6, was originally released about 3 years ago. And in total, with all the attachments, it's something like 6,000 pages. So
yeah.
for an ordinary Joe like me to not only understand it, let alone read it, is pretty tough. But the data, there's a lot of important data there.
Oh, it is. And that's kind of the point of the the summary for policymakers, right? Is they're trying to, kind of whittle it down to the important parts. But what they neglect in that is to admit that most of their, if not all of their projections have not come to pass, especially when it comes to extreme weather, and that there's no hint in the near future, even in many of their model projections in the last report, that any of the extreme things that the media claims will come to pass within most people's lifetimes. So it's, not that I put very much stock into those projections to begin with, but even on that point, they exaggerate in the summary for policymakers.
Linnea, one of the things that I find so interesting about this is the subject of mitigation and, more importantly, adaptation, because it seems to me even if there are extreme changes in temperature and other variables, mankind's going to be able to adapt pretty well, right?
Well, yeah, and especially when it comes to things like sea level rise or temperature changes. Sea level rise is a real thing. It's just nowhere near as extreme as what they're claiming. But the craziest part about all of this is that all of the solutions to climate change that they propose, like getting rid of fossil fuels, severely limiting our ability to have, reliable electricity, all of these things are things that we need in order to adapt to any potential change, whether or not we are responsible for those changes. So when it comes to temperature, it would be great if more people could have reliable air conditioning and heating in their homes around the world. You can only get that with reliable energy. And the same goes for adapting to sea level rise. A lot of the infrastructure that we need to change in urban areas, especially coastal urban areas, is going to require, concrete and stuff that requires, again, petroleum inputs and produces a lot of carbon dioxide when you make cement. And, so all of this stuff is connected, and you cannot go through with the solutions that they want you to go through with and also adapt to whether it's natural or human caused changes in the environment.
And another factor in all of that too that irritates me is this. They're blind to what impact this would have on people in the third world, right? So many people die every year from internal air poisoning because they don't have clean, efficient, reliable energy. And with it, they will flourish, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Still today, one of the most commonly used sources of heat and cooking fuel in the world is like animal dung and wood and stuff burned inside homes in the third world. And that's not something that anybody should have to put up with. But of course, if you let the climate alarmists, take the reins on energy like this, those people are going to be stuck in that position forever.
Yeah, and they won't want to talk about it.
No, of course not.
So you track this stuff across a very wide range of factors. What's the one that drives you most crazy when it hits the headlines in the media?
Oh, that's a tough one. Probably the claim that hurricanes are getting worse is probably the one that is backed by the least data. And if you look at any of the factors that matter when it comes to hurricanes, whether it's number of hurricanes in the season or number of, really big ones in the season, and typhoons too, and also the overall energy of the storm season in both the Atlantic and the Pacific, um, none of the measured data shows anything getting any worse. In fact, in some areas, it seems that it's getting a little bit less likely to have an extreme hurricane. If anything has changed, it might be indicated by the past couple of years of data that the season is getting pushed back a bit. But there's not a long-term data set on that.
Yeah.
That you can really rely on. It's just kind of been the last couple of years. So you can't really make a claim that that's a long-term trend at this point. But the good thing with all of these weather-related climate issues is the longer we have measured data from satellites and from decent ground sensors. The ground sensors are one of the things that annoy me too, but we can get into that if you want. But
Yes, that's a
the
big
longer we
subject.
have that data, the better
Yeah.
it looks, actually.
Yeah. So do you think things are changing? I mean, I like to tell people things are changing because I'm a natural born optimist, but I also might be a bit naive. What do you think?
Well, I think that in general, I don't put too much stock in polling, but polling tends to show that people are actually becoming less concerned about climate change. There was at least in the United States, there was kind of a peak around 2020, 2019 maybe, and it's dropped off pretty quick since then, even among younger generations. And I think that they being, climate alarmists, people who really want to push this stuff and scare people with it, I think that their control is kind of slipping because they gripped too hard. They went too far with it. And so people in my generation and younger grew up with like every single class that we took in school, in public school for my case, tended to reference some kind of climate catastrophe narrative at some point in the course. They just crammed it into everything when I was in school. And I think that actually has kind of a reverse effect from what they're going for a lot of people. And so I do think that things are changing, at least in the United States. I think in Europe, it's starting to change a bit as well. People are getting fed up with the green energy push. People are getting fed up with the idea that you can't have reliable electricity. And so I think the more that the impacts of those policies start to hit people, the less likely it is that people are going to be as convinced by claims about weather being the problem.
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope so. And I'm sure you're going to stay on the case. I will. And Linnea, I hope it's possible for you and I to have another conversation sometime soon in the future.
That would be great. I would love to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not alone in the belief there are signs of hope in this discussion. And maybe we can reach out from a position of hope to a position of optimism soon. Surely it's about time to move on from the extremist positions of people like the Secretary General of the United Nations declaring the Earth is no longer warming, it's now boiling.
Children swept away by monsoon rains, families running from the flames, workers collapsing in scorching heat. And for scientists, it is unequivocal. Humans are to blame. All this is entirely consistent with predictions and repeated warnings. The only surprise is the speed of the change. The era of global warming has ended, the era of global boiling has arrived.
Really, that's not helpful. But in a promising move, the United States Department of Energy has recently published this report with 5 highly credible scientists presenting a critical review of the mainstream published climate science. This 150-page document is the starting point of the first honest and balanced debate about what is really happening with climate. The whole scientific community is now invited to participate, making new submissions and challenging the report if they wish. Now, although the report has a mainly US focus, the scientific principles addressed have policy implications for the whole world. As we were discussing with Linnea, it's all about the IPCC reports, which indirectly dictate global climate and energy policy. I like the final line in the report's conclusion. An approach that acknowledges both the potential risks and benefits of CO2, rather than relying on flawed models and extreme scenarios, is essential for informed and effective decision-making. Of course, there's been a major shitstorm around the report. 85 scientists responded ferociously to it, and 2 lobby groups have sued to try to kill it. Well, I guess it's probably better a shitstorm than no discussion at all. Now, even before the report was published, one of the leading researchers in climate science, Dr. Roger Pielke Jr., was speaking out about climate policy. On Roger's brilliant Substack, and by the way, Substack is an information place I would highly recommend for the curious, Dr. Pielke said, smart energy and climate policies, as long as I've argued, make good sense. But climate evangelism centred on scaring people about the weather does not make sense in politics, in policy, or in science. Well, as soon as he posted that, I wrote at the time, thanks, Roger, that's my new favourite quote. Roger also pointed out some worrying things happening in the media. For example, he highlighted the approach of TV news platforms like CNN in the way they like to talk about climate. Here was CNN's data specialist, Harry Enton, lamenting how people's worry about climate change has not increased from 40% in the past 25 years. He said, climate activists have not successfully made the case for climate change to the American people. This kind of boggles the mind, he said, a little bit, given everything we've seen on our TV screens, our computer screens, the tornadoes, the floodings. You see how they position this all the time about crisis management? And then something even worse. Roger referenced a strange influence group called Covering Climate Now, with advice for 500 major media organisations around the world who have joined this group, learning how to censor the climate story. I'm not kidding, this is really happening. And the 500 members, including the 3 major US TV networks and some of the world's most important newspapers, and especially their news departments, should be ashamed. Look at this. Climate Coverage Now, in its Advice for Journalists section, says there's simply no good faith argument against climate science. And if one accepts the science, one cannot deny the need for rapid, forceful action. Stories or op-eds that dispute the scientific consensus or ridicule climate activism don't belong in news outlets. Now, as somebody who grew up as a journalist, that is shameful. However, in spite of all this, I still remain optimistic. It is going to take time, but I do believe things are changing. Meanwhile, we all have a responsibility to be openly grateful for the beautiful earth we inhabit. And by all measurable data, the planet is in very good shape. The climate has always changed. I could bore you with long charts that show you the dramatic swings from tropical to frozen wasteland through the planet's history. Actually, I'm sorry, hang on, I've got to do this. Just one more chart. This is the history of temperatures on Earth over the past 500,000 years. And what you are looking at now, those very tall peaks in the graph, they are called interglacials, warm periods between the ice ages. Look where we are now, at the right-hand end of that chart. And our current interglacial is cooler than all four before it. Now, when the dinosaurs roamed the Earth among vast forests, the levels of carbon dioxide on Earth were at levels more than 10 times what they are today. And at current levels of 400 parts per million of CO2, many biologists believe that is becoming dangerously low. A reminder that CO2 is plant food, largely responsible for that massive recent rise in the greening of the Earth. In the next 12 months, I think there will be a significant shift in public opinion about this. And there's been an important shift in the position recently of Bill Gates, Microsoft founder and philanthropist, whose charity has spent an estimated $2 billion on various climate-related projects around the world. The influential Gates has posted a 2,000-word blog titled 3 Tough Truths About Climate. And truth number 1 says, climate change is a serious problem, but it will not be the end of civilization. Bill Gates went on to say the doomsday view of climate change is just wrong. Now, that's not big news for most of us, but hopefully it offers permission for many of the climate extremists to tone it down a little bit. I also believe there will be a serious rethink of energy policy in many countries around the world. Now, don't forget, those policies impact costs reaching trillions of dollars. And guess who pays? As always, we, the taxpayer, of course. I recently hear people talking about climate now for the first time, and not in whispered tones of dread. Just through observation, they notice the winters are cold and the summers are hot, and the visible world around us doesn't seem to be changing much. Is it? In summary, I'm hopeful and optimism is approaching. We'll be tracking this. Stay tuned.